Welcome to our cybersecurity webinar featuring Andre Lynch from ConnectWise. I just wanted to take a moment to say hello to our guest presenter. Hello, Andre.
Hello, Matt. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. And a warm welcome to our audience here as well. And thank you for joining us today. In today's webinar, we're diving into the world of cybersecurity, tackling crucial topics like the ever-evolving cyber threat landscape and the latest updates on password security. We've specifically designed this webinar to empower small and medium businesses with valuable insights and practical advice. Our main goal is to educate and help you navigate the modern digital landscape with confidence. We're really excited to have Andre here today. Andre has over 19 years of experience alongside his experience as a university lecturer, specializing in computer science, data communications, and microcomputers. Last but not least, Andre has over 5+ years of experience in cybersecurity, which is our topic today. Before we get started, we value your feedback and we want to make our webinars hit the mark. If you have any suggestions on how we can improve, or if there are any specific topics you'd like us to cover in the future, we're all ears. Just head over to the Q&A section in our Teams event and fill out our survey, which will be in there in a moment. Your input will play a crucial role in shaping our future content. So today's webinar will consist of two topics: password security and the cyber threat landscape. We will also have a Q&A session in the Teams chat after each of the topics. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. And we would be happy to provide further assistance. Once again, thank you for joining us. We hope you find this webinar engaging and, most importantly, valuable for your cybersecurity journey. So let's dive in.
Thank you very much, Matt, and welcome to the audience. I hope you find this webinar very informative. And we're going to start off talking about the threat landscape. So firstly, I just want to picture yourself at this, very idyllic tropical paradise. And this is essentially how business owners envision their businesses on the internet. So essentially, any resource you request, whether it's a file, whether it's data, money transferred, everything just goes smoothly. It just works perfectly. And your users, when they're actually authenticating, that entire process occurs without any hiccups. But the reality is that it's very much akin to natural disasters. Every time your employees or your customers are on the internet, they're being targeted by threat actors. And as you can see from the picture here, these types of threats come in very different forms with different levels of ferocity, intensity, as well as the aftermath or the consequence. So, how at risk is your business? Okay, so there are a few organizations doing very good work in bringing awareness around the threat landscape. One such organization is the National Cyber Resilience Centre Group in the UK, which has 6 regional offices. We also have the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of the GCHQ. And in Ireland, we have the National Cybersecurity Centre. Now, some of the reporting is quite damning, to say, with respect to cybersecurity threats. And here's just a graphic provided from the reporting by the Cyber Resilience Centre. So top right, as you can see, cybercrime costs the UK billions of pounds every year. And also too, from a supply chain perspective, the threats through that particular vector are pretty high. So fewer than 1 in 10 businesses actually actively monitor for those types of risks. Bottom left, although most organizations have some form of digital exposure, only less than 20% actually have a formal incident management plan. And the one that's the most scary for me, I guess, bottom right, 2022, 40% roughly of UK businesses were a target of a cyber attack, where the majority of those were actually phishing attempts. And so, what if the threat actors are successful? What does that look like? So, we've got a few examples here, as you can see on the screen. So, T-Mobile, as you can see, that breach affected 37 million customers. We had the LastPass breach from last year. Early this year in January, the Royal Mail was actually targeted by a Russian ransomware group, and that put that particular entity's operations down for 3 to 4 weeks. And also in the US, as you can see, the government of Oakland were actually targeted by a ransom attack in earlier this year, and the city was actually down for close to 2 months. And that's just some of the stories. We also have some more from other areas. So, for example, Advance, a supplier to the NHS, was actually hit last year, which actually left some of the NHS trust without access to key software for 2 months. And more recently in this year, we had the 3CX, another massive supply chain attack, where the bad actors are able to actually use the application to Trojanize a version application. And also, as you can see, in Ireland, the health service was actually hit by a ransomware attack where the costs were expected to rise to over 100 million euros. And so if I asked anyone in the audience, what are some of the typical risks to your business in general, I'm pretty sure without hesitation, you'll be able to, mention most, if not all, of the terms or examples on the screen. But if I pivot towards, excuse me, cyber threats, how many in the audience have heard of all 10 of these cyber threats? How many are aware of at least a half? How about 3? The key question here is, if you don't know the threats out there, how do you know what is valuable to your business? What's the impact of losing that data or access to your systems, or even how to protect it? And so if we understand the scale of the threat, then we understand where the threats are coming from. And essentially, most of those threats originate from one of two places. The first is hostile nation states. And the threat essentially is targeted towards critical national infrastructure. That includes, as you can see, healthcare, public sector, energy, finance, transport. And these attacks against these industries are politically motivated, and they're designed to cripple a nation state. So if you're anywhere within that supply chain, or you operate within those critical national infrastructure sectors, you are a prime target. And the danger of this is that, as per Gartner's predictions, by 2025, they anticipate that the threat actors would actually be able to weaponize operational technology environments to actually cause human casualties. And we kind of had a precursor to this in Florida a couple of years back, where at the Oldsmar water treatment plant, a hacker was able to use the username and password for a former employee's TeamViewer account. After logging in, they were able to raise the level of lye in the drinking water to poisonous levels. So this is very serious stuff that we're dealing with. And that brings us to the second source of threats, and the one that is statistically a far bigger concern for the SMB space, which would be financially motivated attacks. So the threat actors don't only just work for hostile nation states. They are also a large number of independent organizations and individuals, targeting everyone from small to large businesses. And their motivation is simple. It's money. Okay, so ransomware, business even compromise, they are the largest examples of threats targeting financial gain. And studies suggest that about 70% of ransomware attacks actually target the SMB space. So let's speak a bit about ransomware as a service. So I want you to understand, stress upon you that we have to think of these entities as businesses, the same way that you're concerned within your business with bottom line, efficiency, innovation, customer service, for example. These organizations think the same way. And so essentially, ransomware as a service has kind of like a pyramid structure where you just need a small number of really clever ransomware developers. What they will do is they would actually go out and recruit affiliates. And with those affiliates, they would provide all the training, all the content, all the knowledge, whatever they need to be able to go and cast that net to as many unsuspecting victims as possible. And just underscore exactly what I'm talking about in terms of a business. Here are just some of the common ransomware as a service revenue models. Flat, flat fee. There's an affiliate program. Just pure profit are some examples. But also too, they also offer bug bounty incentives or programs. So essentially what they're doing is they are going to reward or incentivize individuals for finding weaknesses within their systems, whether it's the browser they use, for example, the locking software for encrypting files, and they also with respect to the applications that they use, trying to find security vulnerabilities. They're also offering doxing incentives where they can pay up to, I think is up to like $1 million in Bitcoin for anyone who's successfully able to dox the gang leader, if that makes sense. So now, where does all this happen? It happens in a dark place of the internet called the dark web. And essentially, there's a massive credentials market available on the dark web, very much akin to the likes of, eBay, that structure that you'd find on the surface web. And essentially, it's very easy to get to the dark web. You just need to have the right browser. As you can see, a Tor browser. Within a few minutes, you will have access to lots of nefarious stuff. And here's just some examples of what that looks like. So for example, you can see here that stolen credentials and initial access, so that actual foothold into your network, is being sold on the dark web. And essentially, anything you want. You've got phishing as a service. So Evil Proxy, we only saw this being reported in September, is actually able to get past MFA, which is quite scary. Some other things that you can probably get from the dark web. Do you want UK passports? Fine, go ahead, off you go. If you're into, legal weapons, for example, you've got that there as well too. And also too, if you need to get credit cards, fresh CVV sniffed 100% valid, and just take a look at the prices. That just gives you an understanding of how easy it is to actually get your hands on this information to be able to destroy businesses and lives. And so how are businesses impacted? What's the fallout? So essentially, here's some information, some statistics around attacks. As you can see, the average ransomware dwell time is 23 minutes. Essentially, that represents the time a cyber attacker has free reign within your environment before they're either detected by your systems or they actually deploy that malicious code. So 23 days within your organization, just being able to collect any kind of information they can. So essentially trying to find out how much you can pay and how to leverage that payment from yourself, who are the right people to target. Typically, ransomware will be around 10% of the annual revenue, and that's because they have learned over time that most companies are willing to accept a loss of 10% of annual revenue. Average cost, as you can see, 1.4 million per year. And the key thing here about that cost is that the cost of the ransom is only 20% of that. Okay, the vast majority of that is you as a business having to respond to that particular incident. The other key statistic, as you can see, is the average downtime of 21 days. So let's think about that. Think about your business being offline for 21 days and what impact that can have to your business from a financial perspective, but also to a reputational perspective as well. And some other things, as you can see, legislation. Okay, so depending on the industry you're in or who's at fault for that particular breach, you could be facing particularly serious legal fines if you think about GDPR. And also to insurance. So insurance premiums are skyrocketing, and we're seeing that there's a significant impact for those who have not been covered by cyber insurance. And so let's take a quick look at what an insurer's view of cyber risk is. So essentially what the organizations who actually provide cybersecurity insurance are doing is that they're setting a minimum level of security in order to provide that protection and cover to your business. And the reason this has been the case is because they found out over the last couple of years that most of the businesses they're actually paying up to had very poor cybersecurity practices, and they become quite up to the game in terms of saying, hey, at least you need to have these minimum security measures in place to be covered if you do suffer from a breach. So you might be asking yourself, okay, cool. So, what can I do? Where do I start? How do I respond to the threat? So every day we are working to combat this risk, but it moves and it changes over time. So firstly, acknowledging risk is to understand that you cannot remove it, but you should be doing as much as you can to reduce that risk. And what we should focus on is the overall security positioning of your business or your company. So by doing this, you will start to understand why certain services are being suggested, but also appreciate that if they are right for your business, then you can, excuse me, you can have those specific risk need. So, but at a bare minimum, ensure that you're following a cybersecurity framework. Um, Make sure that you're implementing minimum acceptable security technology that aligns with whatever compliance, insurance, and regulatory obligations you need to fulfill.
So guys, I'm just opening up the webinar just for some questions in regards to the content that you've just seen. So feel free to pop anything into the Q&A section, and our cybersecurity expert Andre will answer any of those. Over to you, Andre.
Awesome, thank you, Matt. And just taking a look here, we've got one or two questions. Let me read the first one. The first one is, what is ransomware and how does it work? So ransomware is a form of malware, which is malicious software. And essentially what it's designed to do is to use a user or an organization to be able to access files on a computer system and then encrypt those files. And once they've actually encrypted those files, then what would happen would be there'd be a ransom that would be demanded for payment to decrypt those files. So it's a form of extortion, essentially, is what ransomware is. Let's see if we got anything else here. All right. Is ransomware performed through email? So email particularly is, let's say, the primary attack vector for ransomware, because the bad guys have realized over time that we are the weakest link as humans, and what they would do via emails through a tactic called phishing is to generate some kind of urgency. We've seen those emails before. Hi, your Microsoft password has expired. Oh, you won, $50,000, for example, or this package. We tried to deliver it, but you're out. Please click on this to reorganize, to reschedule a collection. So they're using these tactics and these techniques, and email is the most common delivery method because we all use email, and sometimes we're very quick to just click on links and unfortunately activate that malicious code or software. All right, let me see if there's anything else that's come through. Oh, very good question. How can my business protect us from new threats? So it's all about having what we call a layered approach or defense in depth. And as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, the threats are very varied. Okay, so for example, thinking about natural disasters, you've got your tornadoes, you've got your hurricanes, you've got your earthquakes, you've got your volcanoes and others. And the way that you either detect, protect, or respond to those vary. And so in cybersecurity, you need to take that approach as well. So for example, you would need to have, for example, multi-factor authentication, strong passwords, for example, an email security solution. You'd also need to have an EDR solution, and it's about having these different layers to be able to detect and protect against the different threats out there. Okay. All right. What percentage of ransomware is stopped when alerted to the proper organizations? What percent of ransomware is stopped when alerted to the proper organizations? When alerted to the proper organizations. I'm assuming organizations refers to the IT companies. Correct me if I'm mistaken. But I'm not sure if there's any clear statistic, but what we've seen is that if you've got a mixture of security awareness training, so the right training, as well as advanced security solutions such as EDR solutions, you can actually reduce the amount of malware that hits your organization by 12%. But in terms of the total percentage that is stopped, I'm not sure if there's any body that collects that organization. Sorry, collects that information, my apologies. Okay, I'll just wait to see if there's any other questions. And if there isn't, I'll turn it back over to Matt, but let's just see if any other questions come through. Okay, just one thing I'll add, just looking at the question that's come through about percentage. What I can say is that depending on the type of EDR solution, which is endpoint detect and respond, that's in part 2 of this series. Depending on the type of endpoint detect and response solution you have, those solutions can actually pick up 95, 96, and in the case of the solution that Leaf uses, 99% of those malicious threats. So there's a very high success rate from the technologies used to detect these particular threats. Okay, so Matt, no more questions in the Q&A section, so I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you guys for those questions. So let's get cracking with the password security segment of our webinar.
Okay, the second topic we're going to tackle is password security. And essentially, we're going to take a look at some of the reasons why passwords needs to be secure, and speak about some of the ways in which we can actually have best practices and make sure that our passwords are very difficult to crack. So I'm going to start off. Obviously, we've presented in the previous segment the ways in which bad actors actually do impact us. But I've also got some more statistics here around, if your passwords are hacked, what that means for businesses. So as you can see here, scrape data of 500 million LinkedIn users are being sold on the dark web. That's from reporting a couple months ago. From a few years back, a massive dump of 87 gigabytes of email addresses and passwords. That was quite significant. Cisco, they confirmed that they were actually hacked by a ransomware group, and employees' personal Google account that contained passwords synced in a web browser was the initial foothold into that environment. And another one here from the reporting we see from the dark web, 24 billion usernames, passwords are available on the dark web for sale. So it's pretty scary stuff. And the key thing to understand is having compromised password is not the end of it. Typically, that's just the starting point for more nefarious activities. So let's just walk through some of those different types of attacks utilizing stolen credentials. So the first is social engineering attacks. This is essentially where threat actors essentially try to deceive users into believing that they are in need of their assistance, for example, with the hope of actually them giving their credentials or access into the network. And we'll have a little bit of a conversation later with respect to social engineering. The second threat we've got listed is insider threats, very significant as well too. So as you appreciate, an insider threat refers to any cybersecurity risk that originates from within your organization. It typically occurs when a current or former employee or contractor or vendor or even a partner with legitimate user credentials misuses their access to the detriment of the organization. network systems and data. So a prime example of this would have been here in the UK, where there was a large multinational engineering firm that in January 2017, they were actually targeted. So that included network intrusion, data was deleted from the servers, and a couple months later in March, the IT director received a text message saying, hey, we've encrypted all of your company data. And contact was made with the police, and apparently within that particular attack, it was so severe that 60 to 80% of the UK operations for that particular firm was unable to operate, and they spent loads of time, effort, resources, money in actually trying to rebuild their systems. And this was caused by a former employee from Birmingham who eventually was convicted for that insider threat. The third is breaking into financial accounts. So once they've got those passwords, depending on the importance of the individual whose passwords they've got, they can get into certain financial systems where they can then go ahead and steal data or put requests in for transfers and start moving around money from different accounts. They can also request to pay ransom. We've gone through some examples of ransomware requests. They can also actually exfiltrate that data using credentials that have been hacked. So we find this particular attack vector used often in what we call triple extortion ransomware, which is fairly new. So essentially what the bad actors would do would be, once they've got the initial access through leaked or hacked credentials, they will then launch the ransomware. Not only will they exfiltrate the data, they would also encrypt the files and threaten to publish the files if you don't pay the ransom. But also too, what they then do is they go after your customers for whom they've got the data for, and actually threaten to expose or publish the credentials unless the customers actually pay a ransom as well. So pretty complex and nefarious stuff going on out there. And the last one is credential stuffing. So this is basically an automated injection of stolen username and passwords into a website login form in order to fraudulently gain access to those user accounts. So this is common because many users will reuse the same password, username and email. And when those credentials are exposed, whether through phishing or data breach, then those stolen credentials are submitted into dozens or hundreds of other sites that can allow an attacker to compromise those accounts too. Okay. So yeah, how secure is your password? What we've got up here are 50 of the most common passwords. If you see one of your passwords on screen, don't feel left out. Many of us have been guilty of having pretty weak passwords, but it just goes to show how poorly we are in terms of doing a job of having good passwords. And there's some reporting around this. So Keepa has produced in their password malpractice report of 2021 some pretty scary statistics of how we actually do treat password security. So as you can see, 57% of those respondents, I think they had interviewed several thousand workplace employees, but 57% of those surveyed actually wrote their passwords on sticky notes. 55%, as you can see, saved their passwords on their phones, passwords saved in the cloud. But also too, let's take a look on the graphic on the right, where 31% of the respondents used their children's names or birthdays. Okay, 37% used their employer's name, and 44% actually reused passwords across personal and work-related accounts. So just making themselves very susceptible to password compromise. And here's why it's important. With the current tools that are available to threat actors and bad actors, it's really not that hard to crack passwords. Okay, so let's take a look here. First, we'll take a look at the first row, which mentions the number of characters. So let's say 8 characters, for example. And if you go all the way to the last column on that row, it can take just 8 hours to actually crack an 8-character password. Okay, if we increase the number of characters and the complexity, so let's choose 14 characters, numbers included upper and lowercase letters, that is going to take 9 million years to crack. So this kind of underscores why it's important to make sure that you have very robust, very strong passwords that cannot be easily broken by the bad actors. So let's take a look at some of the techniques that the bad actors actually use to crack passwords. So the first example is a brute force attack, which is an attempt to discover a password by essentially systematically trying every possible combination of letters, numbers, and symbols until you discover the one correct combination that works. And if your website requires user authentication, you're a good target for brute force attacks. Next, we have spraying. So password spraying is where the hacker takes common non-complex passwords and essentially, let's say, spray them across an entire organization, hoping that a single user might be using something like, ABC123 password, their pet's name, for example, or any one of the most utilized passwords that are publicly available. Dictionary attack. So a dictionary attack is a variant of the brute force technique where the attacker runs through common words and phrases such as those that would be found from a dictionary to kind of guess those passwords. The fourth entry we have here is rainbow table. So this approach involves using different words from the original password in order to generate other possible passwords. So these malicious actors can keep a list of what they call a rainbow table with them. And this list contains leaked privacy cracked passwords, which will make the overall password cracking method more efficient, right? So let's take a look at some of those password don'ts that actually make it very easy for bad actors to decrypt your passwords. So first one, do not use personal information in your password. Remember to avoid using personal information like names, company names, birthdays, addresses, hobbies, etc. In the event of a cyber attack, a hacker might use, let's say, a bot to scan your existing social media profiles or social profiles. And in addition, they can scan your friends' profiles and score your employer's website for keywords to aid in that unauthorized access. Leet speak. So leet speak, also known as hack speak or simply leet, is essentially where, as you can see on the screen, you substitute the words of letters with numbers or special characters that look quite similar to that letter. So we generally have this misconception that leet speak is secure, but it really isn't. A third, sharing passwords with coworkers, and we get it. Sometimes sharing a password with a colleague can save time and effort. There's nothing more frustrating than being close to finishing off a project, for example, and suddenly have an access issue. So what's the harm? Share a password. But password sharing and weak password creation is responsible statistically for 8 out of 10 security breaches, according to a report by Verizon. Okay. In addition, if a hacker actually does gain entry, a shared password can have far more disastrous implications for database protection. Using the same password on multiple platforms. So as I mentioned, bad actors have different techniques where they essentially reuse passwords across multiple platforms for a particular target because they know humans, they want to make life easy for themselves. And so if you've got multiple passwords across, if you've got the same password across multiple platforms, then the bad actor is just going to keep trying those passwords across those platforms. Hopefully they will be successful. That's what they're hoping for. And the last one, obviously, writing down your passwords, whether it's on a post-it note, whether it's in a OneNote, a book, not a good practice. If someone gets their hands on that physical copy of your password, then you're compromised. Okay, and also to having a post-it notes, displayed around the office. Anyone within the office can easily shoulder surf and they know your password. Okay, so not very good practices. All right, so let's test the audience. Let's see how's your password security. And what we have here is a short quiz, as you can see, available at view.ceros.com. And we're just going to walk through a few of these questions here, just to get an understanding of, do you understand what good password security looks like? All right, so I'll click on Start Quiz. Let's look at the first question. We're only going to do 3 of them. How often do hacking-related data breaches leverage stolen or weak passwords? 10%, 27%, 63, 81% of the time. Given how often this happens, I'm going to choose 81% of the time. And yep, coming from Verizon's communications report, 2017, 81% of the time that occurs. Another question. Common words and phrases are safe for passwords as long as they are easy for you to remember, or at least 12 characters long and include a number and punctuation mark, are in a language other than English. None of the above. I am going to say none of the above are actually safe. And that's correct. None of these particular approaches are safe. Let's do just one more. Okay, let's skip ahead. So, what does good look like from a password security perspective? So let's walk through what that would be. So, firstly, delete accounts you don't use. Okay, bad actors are looking for the weakest link, any opening into your network, and essentially, for myself as well, there are many websites we have to sign up to and we forget about them. And after many years, those passwords you use are probably very, very poor. So when you get a chance, do a bit of decluttering and delete any accounts that you don't actually use. Choose 3 words at random. Okay, so at random. So following this method gives you a long password in plain English and a password that's able to avoid brute force password attacks and also to prevent a dictionary attack. Also, make sure that your passwords are unique, they're complex, and they're long passwords for every single account. So make sure they're unique and you're not reusing the same password. Dark web monitoring. So check the dark web for sale of yours as well as your company's data and credentials. And if you find that they are, you're then able to take the appropriate action to mitigate that risk, which might be, resetting that password, making it much stronger, or as well as implementing the 5th entry, which is multi-factor authentication. So using more than one method for authenticating the user, which could be, for example, something like a password or username, something you have using your phone and sending an MFA prompt to that phone for a code to be returned, or something that you are using probably some biometric data. And lastly, password manager. I can't recommend this enough. So a password manager, for those who don't know, is an app on your phone, your tablet, your computer that stores your passwords, so you don't need to remember these long, complex passwords. And once you've logged into a password manager using your master password, it can then generate and remember passwords for all of your online accounts. So here are some examples of some really good practices you can use to make sure that your passwords are very strong and secure.
Okay, guys. So share your queries and questions with Andre in the Q&A, and he'll be happy to demystify any of the content covered. Andre, over to you.
Yes, I appreciate that, Matt. We did have a question come through that I wanted to expand on the answer. So the question was, you mentioned they can now bypass MFA. Is this in the form of email? So yes, as we've seen in the presentation, email phishing is the primary attack vector that's used. 90, probably close to 90%. Well, I think 85 to 90%. So in this particular new attack we've seen, what happens is it starts with an email, a phishing email, probably to say, hey, reset your password expired. Someone that clicks on the malicious link within the email, and that starts the process of getting around the MFA. So what would happen would be there would be a phishing site that's set up by the bad actor, and when you send her a request to reset your password, they would intercept that communication. It's what's called a man-in-the-middle attack, and then pass that communication on to the, let's say, Office 365, the original website. So they would sit in the middle, capture all the communication, capture your MFA code that's been sent or the prompt. They would capture your passwords and act as that proxy to send you information to get you authorized. And once you're authorized within the website, they then take control of that session and redirect you to another link, possibly like a phishing or dodgy link, and they then control and have access to your account. So that's why, as I mentioned previously, the only way to target or tackle these is to have those multiple layers. So having MFA, having DNS filtering capabilities, having email security, EDR, all these different layers in conjunction will help to mitigate lots of these different attacks that we see. Okay. How do you do dark web monitoring? Very good question. So I wouldn't recommend that you do it yourself. It would take, signing into the dark web and navigating a very scary place. Fortunately, there are some tools out there that can do it for you, an organization. So Leaf IT, they have access to a dark web tool where once they provide your email address or your company's domain, that tool is going to actually go to check to see if those credentials are on the dark web, and then return that information to Leaf IT. And they can also, as well, if needed, continuously monitor the dark web. So if there are new credentials that are found on the dark web, once again, Leaf IT will be notified, and they yourselves would then respond to that particular exposure. Another question: how secure is a password manager? Yeah, I mean, they're quite secure, but once again, obviously with the recent news stories, they have been a case where at least one of the password management companies were actually breached. But the behind the scenes, the technology and encryption and the methods that they use are pretty robust. So for example, they don't, well, the good password managers out there, they don't store your passwords. They don't store your master password as well. And so they will always recommend that you make sure that you either know that master password or there's a hint that you can use in the event that you forgot it to be able to remember it. But they use very advanced encryption capabilities. What they've done as well too, I've noticed, is that they've added multiple layers of authentication as well too, to address some of the different threats out there. So the point about password managers and very secure technologies, but once again, organizations, big, small, major, if they're in the tech industry, they all get targeted because there's always a weak link, which is typically a user not doing what they are supposed to do. All right, so hope I've been able to answer those questions sufficiently. I'll just probably, Matt, just maybe wait for another minute or so to see if there are any other questions that come through. But I guess the key takeaway I want everyone in the audience to have is that the threats are constantly changing, as with any aspect of our lives, whether it's business, whether it's relationships, whether it's social. Things change over time. When I was growing up, there was no such thing as a cell phone. There was no such thing as social media. So times change, and you have to adapt to those changes, whether they are threats that we're seeing from a cybersecurity perspective. So I think staying abreast of those threats, having an understanding of what those threats are and what the risk is to your business would be very useful, and then having the right conversation with Leaf IT to understand, hey, which solutions are appropriate for the threats that my business might see. Okay, so no other questions. I want to thank everyone for the very good questions that were asked in the chat. And Matt, I will hand it back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Andre. So for us now, it's a question of thanking you all for coming. So thank you for your participation, and thank you, Andre, for your generous insights. To sum up, as Andre said, cybersecurity is ever evolving, and it does require continuous learning and adaptation. We hope this webinar has equipped you with some valuable knowledge and practical insights. It's important to remember that you are an essential line of defense in safeguarding your digital assets. For your security, follow some of the best practices discussed today, share your knowledge with others, and try to create a culture of cybersecurity awareness. Thank you once again for joining us today. Make sure you join us for part 2 in our webinar series. And from everyone at Leaf and ConnectWise, have a good day.